Hello and welcome back to Benchmark Podcast. My name is Katie. Today I have with me Noah, who's a volunteer here, who will be telling us a little bit about his story and what brought him here to Benchmark. So, Noah, first thing that I would like to know is how did you find Benchmark and what made you volunteer here?
So Benchmark actually found me, if I'm being honest. They found me in a place called Mono's House, I believe originally was the first time I ever met Will. And he had a program going there long before I'd gotten there, but he would come in and play basketball with the young men. Mono's House is just for men at that point in time, young men who were, either a ward of the state, they were didn't have, families to go to or a home to go to kind of thing. I was a ward of the state at that time. So Will would come in and just play basketball with us and talk with us and just build relationships, build connections, because at that point, a lot of those, a lot of the guys in Mono's House, and then later on I met him in Yick as well, same kind of program, he would come and play basketball with us, do some physical training, but they're not open to talking about what's going on in their life because they really, at least me personally, I'll speak for myself, I didn't understand why those things were happening to me. I felt displaced, and it's tough to talk to staff members, right? The people that you see on a daily basis, they're there for 8 hours a day. They have to kind of be a parent, a paternal figure in some sense, but then they leave after 8 hours. So it's very tough to form meaningful connections with those people. And then you have, mental health staff and stuff like that are there to try and help you with anything that you might be going through. But somebody like Will, who can come in and have fun with you guys, it's a little bit easier to break down some of those barriers because, whether it just be the fact that you got demoralized by his basketball skills, and he just came in there and whooped your butt for 2 or 3 basketball games in a row, and you get to talk and smack back and forth, it just breaks down those barriers much quicker. And so Will came in there, did that while I was there. And I didn't really see much of Will for a while after that. I, aged out of Mono's House. I turned 18. Started working full time and that kind of stuff. And fast forward a couple years, Will and I found out we have a mutual acquaintance. And so he had talked to me. I'd been telling him kind of a little bit about my story and how Benchmark, program had helped me out when I was in Mono's House in Yick. And he was like, have you seen Will recently? Do you want to sit down and maybe have a lunch and talk to Will and see what, if you're interested, you might be able to go volunteer at Benchmark. And so that's what we did. And fast forward another few months and, here we are today talking about it
awesome.
On a podcast, which I've never even done one of these before.
That's
so
great.
This is the first time.
It's very low stakes, all you got to do is talk into a mic. That's all
I can talk about myself all day long. So
that's great. That's great that you were able to benefit from Benchmark and the programs as a youth. And then now you are coming back and giving back and being a volunteer and a mentor here, which is awesome. How was the transition when you aged out of the program to working full time? That can sometimes be a really difficult transition for people. So how did that work? Did you have support from people during that time? How did that go for you?
So at that point, yeah, it was a tough transition. I will say that. So it's a long story there, but my mother had signed custody of me over to the state when I was almost 16, 15 turning 16 that summer. I was very rebellious. And so she was, prior state parole law enforcement. So I was making choices, in the selling and using drug side of things. And, she was not comfortable with that. She did not want me in her home. There was even a month or two I'd lived in the shed out back because she just was not, she didn't want me in her house, and it was a tough response. I was always a tough love kind of person. I understood where she stood on that, and did not want me to get into any of those things. But that was what had happened there that got me into Mono's House. But my father was deployed at that point in time. He was in the Army. And so he was deployed at that point in time. And so he was back home by that point, and we were starting to, try and rebuild our family connection. Unfortunately, once you sign custody of your child over, there is no takesies backsies. So they just get to come in then to Mono's House and to places, I would run away from Mono's House fairly frequently. I didn't like it there, but I did work while I was there. So getting to the support side of things, I had my family back a little bit. They didn't know necessarily how to support me at that point because I was still a little bit rebellious. I felt rejected, so I wasn't as receptive to the parenting that they were trying to provide at that point. I think, in conversations with my mother since then, she's like, I just thought there was more resources. Her being in state parole, she knew what parolees and, people on probation had for drug and alcohol recovery resources, not the same resources that are available to juveniles, unfortunately.
Okay.
So she was thinking,
distinction there between juveniles and adults and the resources available.
Right. And a lot of that is because, adults, they are trying to get them to recover. A lot of times it's drugs or alcohol that has to do with a lot of crime. If we're being honest, that's the majority of crime probably is based in a lot of that. And so there's a lot of focus on recovering from that side of things so that the crime aspect of that is also ceased. I think in juvenile, it's trying to fix a broken home, which I didn't necessarily have. I had both parents, most of my life. They were very good parents. They did as best they could with what they had, and it just was not what she was expecting, I think, in terms of resources for me going through, she just saw something that was illegal. And she was like, well, we can get him fixed if we just get him these resources. And unfortunately, we didn't do the research necessary. She was trying to find a solution, and there was not much time to go on. She could see the road I was going down was not a good one. And I think a lot of worry and just fear took over, and she made, the best decision that she could at that point. But getting back to your original question, transitioning out of Mono's house, I had a lot of support. My dad was definitely batting for me kind of thing. He was helping me make sure that I could get to and from work because I did not have a driver's license at that point in time. Unfortunately, I have epilepsy, and so I could not have a license. I was having seizures too frequently.
Okay.
So I made sure that I would get back and forth to work. At that point, I had rented a room that was North Plum Street. So I was living in the city. So it was, a lot of help from him and my mom too, but she was working full time still. My dad worked a lot of overnight hours and stuff like that. Okay. He was an EMT in the civilian world. So just his schedule was more, conducive to helping me out on that side of things. But I had a lot of support and am very grateful for that now that I look back at it. It's wild because I haven't thought about that in a lot of years. But living on my own was the weird part, because you go from, I'd lived in a tent for a period of time when I'd run away from Mono's house. Like there was a period of time I lived in a tent and just still went to work, but I didn't want to live in a group home. The setting was uncomfortable. Just, again, probably that rebellious nature. I just didn't want to be where they wanted me to be, if for no other reason than they wanted me to be there, and I didn't want to.
Absolutely.
But so it was living alone was a huge transition. And I got the hang of it fairly quickly, but I was not responsible in doing that.
Okay.
I think over the course of a year and a half, I had 3 different. The first one was just a room that I had rented. Then I had like a studio apartment, and then I went back to a room because I was just not responsible with paying rent. I would prioritize almost anything else,
Okay. So it's better when you were in a room and somebody else had that responsibility, and yeah.
Yeah, very much so. But I was just not, at that point in time, I was not focused on living a responsible adult life. I had zero experience in this, and I wasn't necessarily interested in being the best that I could be at that point. I was just free finally from, parenting and all those things, and eventually after a year and a half of living on my own, I finally was like, well, I do want something better in life. So I applied to colleges. That was fun. A lot of rejections, but
it's a lot of work.
Well,
and a lot of people do get rejected.
Yeah, I got accepted at a very surprising one. Back then it was Messiah College. Now it's Messiah University. But I got accepted at a Christian university.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic opportunity. I did not take full advantage of it, however. So I went to Messiah, and part of the requirements for going to a Christian university is that you have to attend chapel. And so that was, after one semester, I did not attend enough chapel. And so
Okay.
I ended up getting kicked out for that. So
Interesting.
I have credits, but I don't have an associate's. I don't have anything like that yet. But
But you started and you completed a semester?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that's
I
still an
will use those
accomplishment.
credits someday. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Because I'm not one to waste money.
Yeah.
Not anymore. So it's like, yeah, that money has already been spent and the credits are still hanging out there somewhere in the ether. So
What were you going for? What was your your program?
business management. So
Okay.
that was my goal at some point, was to manage my own business. I didn't know what kind of business I
Right.
wanted to have. None of that yet.
You just had the
Um,
interest.
Yeah. Well, and I knew generally, I was like, I just the way that I work, I am a much better leader now, but I knew back then, I was like, people, for whatever reason, I think now I know why. I'm a social butterfly. I talk to anybody about anything for, any amount of time. It's just what I'm good at. I've learned that over the years. I just, my social skills were developed at a young age. And so I became very good at that. So leadership interested me, and I didn't know that it was leadership and being able to help people, ultimately being able to help others provide for their families while also at the same time providing for mine. But didn't know that back then. I didn't have that vision. I didn't have that idea. This is all after the fact. But yeah, it's one of those things for me. It's like I look at, something as simple as a restaurant, I get to do the part of feeding people if I'm cooking, right? But
Right.
if you own the restaurant, if you, even just manage the restaurant, you get to help the dishwasher provide for his family. The waitresses and the servers and the hosts and hostesses provide for their families, all those kinds of things where it's like, and even the people who supply your food, we get it from a lot of smaller vendors, so it's like we have an older gentleman, his name's Dino. He comes in and he's like, if you guys were to stop ordering pita and baklava, and he gets everything Greek, anything that has to do with the
Okay.
Greek side of things. He does that. He specializes in getting very, very good Greek quality ingredients.
That
But
sounds yummy.
he's like, he's like, if you guys would stop ordering, he's like, my family would starve. And he jokes
Oh,
about it with us, but we will never stop ordering from him. He
Yeah.
is a fantastic man, and he has a very good business. But for me, it's one of those things. It's like, even just a small business,
So your actions have a reach, and you now at this point have that big picture view of how much you can influence other people's lives. So if you are a manager or an owner, these people rely on you. It's a heavy responsibility, but it is something that people like you, they take and they hold on to, and they take it really seriously, and you run with it, which is great, which is awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I used to always shirk responsibility and shy away from it because it, like you said, people rely on you.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I would fall short simply because I was not going with, maximum effort, with focus, with intention. And it's one of those things for me now. It's like, I realize that I've been blessed. I've been blessed with a really good upbringing, a mother who really just tried hard to develop those social skills and get me to be the man that I am today. And so it's one of those things, and my father as well. I mean, no lack of effort on his part, but it's one of those things for me. It's like it takes a certain type of mentality, I guess, and that fortunately, for me, has been cultivated in my experience in life. And I don't think it happens by coincidence. I think, having those desires and understanding of what it takes, and a willingness, to say, I want that responsibility. I don't just want it for my own personal well-being, but I want it because it will be able to provide for others. And not just in a monetary sense, but like, I've seen good workplaces and I've seen bad workplaces. I want to have a place where people can come and work and it feels like a family. You can talk to anybody. You might be having a rough day today. We all have them. So it's like, we have a culture, at work, and a lot of this has to do with my boss and what he's done. But we have a culture at work where it's like, you come in, you can tell your energy might be off a little bit, and you just say, hey, let's take 10 or 15 minutes before we even get into the day, before things get really stressful, and let's figure out what's going on. If you need to take some time throughout the day, even that it's like, all right, stuff's going on at home. You're stressed about kids, family, other stuff, outside of work. We try and, I don't want to say isolate, or what's the word I'm looking for
Kind
here?
of separate things, or at least try to, from like work and home if you can. But in the end, though, those things do affect each other. And like, even if you try to leave it at the door, which is what some people's mentality is like, okay, I go into work and I'm trying to leave everything behind. Sometimes you just can't. If something's going on, especially in a younger person too, it's hard to drop that. It's something that is affecting you, whether it's like, you know, a relationship conflict or just like a familial conflict. But like you said, the best bosses are ones that understand that your whole life has all kinds of different aspects to it, and giving you the space and what you need to get through those bad times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having a good leader as a boss is something that makes such a difference in the workplace, for sure. And if you have that role at some point, you can really influence people. Like, yeah, you do maybe affect their paychecks, sure, financially, but there's so much more to it than that with influence and how much you can help develop someone as a leader or just as I just keep it simple, a good member of society or a better member of the community. How are we influencing those around us? Mostly with work, because that's where we spend the most of our time, you know, especially once you're done school.
Exactly.
Work is where you spend all your time. How do we help develop the people around us to be better members of the community and impact those who need it? That's the goal, for sure. You mentioned that your social skills were developed at a young age. Why was that, and how did that come about?
So my mother was just very, very persistent with me.
Okay.
And I see now, you know, my daughter she'll be 3 this year. And so later this month, actually. But
Nice.
it's one of those things for me. I see the persistence, you know, that she put into making me say thank you, making me say please and thank you, you know, even to strangers at, you know, the waitress at the Two Cousins, you know, that we used to frequent a lot.
Mm-hmm.
She used to always tell my mom, you know, well, he always says please. His manners are very good, you know, and
That's
my
awesome.
mother would push me to do that. And at first, I was a shy little kid, just because, you know, I think that's what you do. You cling to your mom's leg, and, you know, until I guess, I don't know if it was a combination of just church and her, you know, not necessarily pushing me outside of my comfort zone in a bad way, but in a sense where it's like, you know, no, like go talk to people, you know.
Yeah.
I was apparently an adorable little child, so people at church loved me, and, you know, all the folks that are now a little bit older, you know, they're like, oh, you know, you were just so talkative when you were young, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's weird, because for a long time I was very isolated. I didn't want to
Right.
I wasn't outgoing. I knew that I had the set of skills, but I did not utilize them just because I wasn't comfortable with myself.
Right. But sounds like your mom really influenced you to be that way
110%,
and to tap into that extroversion. Will you do the same thing with your daughter, do you think?
110%.
Okay.
Yeah. Even now, it's like, you know, she is very outgoing. So I don't know that I'll have to,
Then maybe
push
she's
her
got it
outside
all
of her
under
comfort
control.
zone, but we'll definitely have to teach the manners. Yeah. She does not like to be told no. That is one
Okay.
thing for sure.
Does
But
anyone?
yeah, no, they do not. But trying to take it with grace, I guess,
Yes.
and it's funny too, because it's pushed me to the point of understanding, you know, what my mother must have gone through when, you know, you see your child go through something like what I chose to go through. It's not even that I was forced into that path. Like, I chose to pursue these things simply out of whatever it was, rebellious nature, desire to, you know, I wanted to make money and not really have to work for it. When I was 14, I got my first job. That was at the Renaissance Fair. And again, developing social skills. I sold pickles on a stick from the pickle cart.
Yep, I remember those.
And so it's one of those things for me where it's like, you know, I wanted to have money, but I didn't necessarily want to work hard days in the hot sun to do it.
Yeah.
And so I tried to take the easy route, which was at that point, I thought selling drugs. You know, you watch movies, Scarface, all these things that make it look so good and glorious, and you can have so much money, and then you can, you know, blow it on whatever you want kind of thing. I was young and dumb. And so I was like, well, maybe I can do that too, you know?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I had the business mindset at that point in time to just, you know, make now I look back at it, it was not a good idea, but a decent business plan, you know?
It was lucrative for you.
Right.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I wish it would have been a massive failure from the start so that I just didn't pursue it any further. But yeah, it was lucrative, and it made me decent money without really having to work too terribly hard. I just had to take a risk, and I was familiar with that enough that it was like, okay, it's for me, I looked at it as a minimal risk, and it's a very high risk because you risk, especially, as a juvenile taking any kind of controlled substance onto a school property. They do not look kindly upon those things. And it was a massive risk that I didn't even recognize as that big of a deal. I just minimized it because it was lucrative, right. And so I ignored the risk, and unfortunately paid the price for it, Fortunately and unfortunately, because again, I wouldn't trade any of the experiences, because it shaped me into who I am today. I don't think I would be able to sit here and talk to you and even have the desire to help anybody if I didn't struggle myself, and understand what it's like to just be rejected, feeling rejected by your own family, not feeling like you have a home anymore. You're not sleeping in your own bed. You're sleeping in a bunkhouse with, 2 other kids that you don't know from Adam,
Right.
that are also, in a similar situation. But seeing, what these kids have to go through. I mean, there's kids here who are dealing with problems that they are grown people problems, and these kids are 12 and 13 and 14 years old.
Right.
And I'm like, I wouldn't trade those experiences that I would, most people would say they were traumatic or, rough. They were rough.
Yeah.
But they made me desire to give back in a way that I don't think I would have that if it weren't for understanding what life sucks sometimes,
Yeah.
But
And out
if
of
we can
those-
avoid that with good choices,
Exactly. And out of those like negative experiences, you can pull positive aspects out of it. It's different for everyone. Yeah, like there can be some, I don't know if it's correct, but like some good aspects, I guess, of some traumatic experiences. You can
Absolutely.
certainly learn from any experience, good or bad.
Willingness.
Exactly.
As long as you're willing
as
to.
long as you have the hunger. You mentioned, your mom was in law enforcement and your dad was in the military. So, how did you even get into dealing with drugs? How did that happen? Do you feel like it was something about your environment or peers, or you mentioned movies kind of did influence that a little bit. It made it, I guess, it Hollywoodized it, made it look
Glorified it,
really
yeah.
attractive. Was there anything else that contributed to those choices that you made as a youth?
So I was prescribed medication for my ADHD, and I hated taking it
Okay.
because it made me feel weird. It affected my mood in ways I didn't like. I couldn't sleep at night and all these kinds of things. And I knew that somebody, somewhere at that school was willing to purchase it for, a pretty penny. And so it was one of those things for me where I was like, I don't even like this stuff.
Right.
But somebody likes it and they're willing to pay me for it. So that's how it originally started, is that I had been on 3 different medications for it, and 2 of them, I sold every single pill. I mean, I was just did not enjoy the effects of it.
Okay.
And then after that, one of the gentlemen who I'd sold to, his older brother, sold marijuana. And so he was in college by that point. I think he was like, his older brother was a freshman in college, and I was at that point a sophomore. So my second year in high school. And I had smoked it before, but never really, was interested in, I mean, I just didn't enjoy the side effects of it.
Yeah.
But when you start hanging out with older kids, you start doing stuff just to kind of fit in. At least I did.
Of course, yeah.
And so I did stuff to fit in, and it just became part of a culture that I enjoyed, that the pothead being lazy and rebellious, and the music and all that kind of fun stuff, and just hanging out with buddies and smoking. And so his older brother and I became very well acquainted, and I started selling weed for him then. And so in my brain, it was one of those things where I'm like, okay, I only get 30 of these a month. I can have as much of this, as I can sell, kind of thing. And so it just became a little rabbit hole that, that I
Yeah.
fell into, kind of thing, Alice in Wonderland style. And I never, never really had a business plan for that, like planned out in the beginning. I just kind of adapted as time went on, and it was like, well, you can make more money selling other things. You can, there's a higher demand. People who smoke weed usually probably smoke about the same amount of weed. It's not very addictive, at least I didn't think so at that point in time. So they're not going to come back until they run out, But there's other drugs that people, unfortunately, a lot of stimulants, it increases their, desire for it, and they will use much more of it within a shorter period of time, and they will need that drug. They will need to come back and purchase that in a shorter period of time, and they will do whatever, they need to get the money to purchase that from you. And that was, I look back at it now, and it was probably one of the darkest times of my life, because I didn't care what stories people told me about. Well, I just need a little bit to hold me over until it's like, do you have money? Yes or no? Because it was a transaction for me. And it was looking at it now, it was the lowest I think I've ever been in my life. I wasn't addicted to any of those chemicals, but I was so addicted to the money that came from it that I was willing to make deals with the devil, kind of thing. Like, because if I was not the devil himself, like it was a terrible time for me personally, looking back at how I behaved. I was just heartless. I was like a heartless human being. I just cared about whether or not you had money in hand for me. If not, I don't care how sick you are. I don't care, what's going on in your life. The only thing I cared about was money. And
How old were you at that point?
that would have been probably about 19.
Okay.
So that was just getting out of Mono's house, and I was still working, but a lot of the people that I knew too, that I worked with, also used a lot of those substances. In kitchens, unfortunately, a lot of people use stimulants, and that was one of the things too, where it was very, very good connections for me, because they know somebody that doesn't work there anymore, but works somewhere else, or that kind of stuff, where it's this web that you weave of not so good people. But yeah, it was an effective method of marketing, for lack of a better term. That it was just like, well, this guy will tell his buddy, and he'll tell 3 of his friends, and it just goes from there. But
it's probably one of the most effective word of mouth marketing examples that you can think of.
It's sad that it is, but yeah, unfortunately it is. It's a very good example of, word of mouth definitely spreads quick.
That's really, because you can't
good or
post
bad.
an ad, it's really the only way that you would market something like illegal like that.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Which is just it's just from a business perspective, it's just interesting to think about how that works versus how a traditional business like a restaurant would advertise and market, their food and things like that.
You can't put your number on a t-shirt.
Exactly.
But yeah, unfortunately too, I would say fortunately and unfortunately, it got me fired from good jobs, because, when under the gun, you would have somebody who was buying from you, and they were, I had a gentleman at one of my jobs, he would go to the bathroom way too frequently. And so the boss knew, but one of those times that, he got caught, and he was so out of his mind that he just gave me up immediately.
Right.
And so boss man fired us both, but it was one of those things where you go, well, if he wouldn't have told on me. And so I shirked
Then
that
you blame
responsibility,
him.
right?
Right.
I shook it off as saying, well, I wasn't responsible for this. Like, I wasn't making any bad choices. It was him, who got too messed up. And it's like, I've learned a lot of it comes from AA. I attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And there's Narcotics Anonymous as well, but I had more of an issue with alcohol because it was a socially acceptable thing to do. And so I learned a lot of it from Alcoholics Anonymous, where it is, you do a daily inventory, and sometimes it may seem, very benign. It's not a big issue, but if it comes up at the end of the day, you most likely did a little something wrong there. A lot of times it has to do with, for me, work. I work a lot. So it's little things at work where you go, maybe I shouldn't have been so snippy, with this server today, or maybe because my spiritual well-being was not where it needed to be, I reacted instead of responding to a situation. And so it's these little things where learning, for me, I had to learn how to take responsibility for those actions. Because a lot of times I saw it as other people's choice. I was just the guy, who was trying to, I didn't even have a family at that point. I was just trying to feed myself and make a quick, easy buck.
Mm-hmm.
And it's given me a lot of respect too for those who really do work hard for a living, because I chose the easy route. I chose the quick and dirty route. And it's not very rewarding when it all comes down to it. You get money, but at the end I was addicted to the money and that lifestyle more than I think. I didn't even, care about what it gave me. There was no real risk in my brain. I was just so hyper focused on this one thing that it took all of my morals, it took all of the human out of me, and just turned me into a machine, a vending machine for illegal substances. And it was like, that's why I say it was one of the darkest times of my life, because I don't know that I had any morals at that point that I would uphold.
Did you feel like in that time, did you have true friends, trusted people around you that, did you have good, solid relationships at that point?
You lose all of that. And a lot of that has to do with, at least for me, I don't know what anybody else's experience is, but I lost the people that were closest to me because I didn't want them to see what I was doing, who I was, the man that I was, that I had become, because I was, barely human at that point. So I isolated a lot of, the people who cared about me the most, my family, the ones that would have been the most supportive of me. I isolated myself from them because I knew they cared. I didn't want them to see what their hard work had turned into, kind of thing, at least in my eyes. That's how I perceived it at that time. Sure. And then any other friends that you have, you can only tell them so much, because you're just, it's a very, very paranoid mindset, at least, that
Absolutely.
I had maintained
it's very
at that
secretive.
point.
You don't just want to tell everyone what you're doing.
Right. And you don't, even those who might come to you to purchase, like, you don't want to tell them, this, I do this for a living, and if you were to come and rob me today, you could get away with a lot of money, kind of thing. But it's like, you don't even want to share it with people, to some degree, because you're just, and some people do, but I was so paranoid. I was so worried and anxious and looking over my shoulder. Like, I remember walking down streets, and if I was ever going past, like in the city here, there's a lot of little alleyways and stuff like that, those little arches that people have in between their houses. I would walk wide to go towards the side of the street where the cars were passing and make sure that I would be able to look down alleyway, every single one of them. And just that mentality, that mindset, like, it is, it's mentally exhausting.
It is.
And so
Very
it just
much
makes
so.
it so hard to live. Like, now I look at my life and I'm like nobody would, if anybody wants to hurt me, I mean, hey, you go for it. You can get maybe $25 out of my wallet, but like, I'll cancel my cards the moment that you can take it. If you need it that bad, take it, But at that point I was so hyper focused on that I was like, nobody can take, this is mine.
Right.
I've worked hard for this, even though I didn't work hard for it. I was a scumbag for it. But
it's interesting because while you said that it was like the quick and dirty or easy way to make money, over time, that emotional taxation that you felt probably doesn't make it feel so great anymore at a point when you have to live like that and looking over your shoulder so much with that paranoia. Like you said, it is very, very emotionally exhausting. So it's easy in some ways, but also very difficult on your mind and body and others to be living that way. So, that's a really low point in your life. How did you eventually turn that around to get to where you are now, where you are sober? Congratulations, for a while, and you're attending meetings, you are making better choices. How did you get from there to here?
Ultimately, people who genuinely cared. I met a lot of them. And at first I was hesitant to accept any help. I was very stubborn. I was very hard-headed. I can do all this on my own. Like I wouldn't even sign up for food stamps or anything like that, even though I didn't, I was working a full-time job that still I didn't make enough money, to buy food pretty much kind of thing at the end of the week after paying bills. Like I would refuse any help at first because I wanted to show, I think, to my mother, to my father, like, because you kicked me out, like I will show you. I'm a lone wolf now, and I will show you that I can do it on my own. But as they say, it takes a village to raise a kid kind of thing. I think it takes a community of people, to stay healthy and balanced in life. And I didn't realize that until I really got connected with a lot of people who genuinely cared. And I don't think they stopped caring about my well-being. Other people that I would meet for the first time, that's a different story. But I think overall, I think my family didn't stop caring and wanted to be supportive. But when you see somebody who is not willing to allow you to help them, we were talking about willingness earlier, and the willingness to learn. I became willing to try something new for a better life, just anything to get away from the mental, wasteland that I was in my life. Because it was so horrible for me to even, like, once I really perceived what I was doing in life and what was what the future looks like for that. I was incarcerated between 2019 and 2025 7 times, and for just all drug-related issues and that kind of stuff. And it's like, it's just not, there's no future in that. You're going to end up, as they say, in jail or dead. And I, unfortunately, at that point in my life, I was just like, oh, well, if I end up dead, I end up dead, but I don't want to be in jail.
Wow.
So I was like, because I knew the risk, I knew what the risk factors were going into it. Obviously, I was not very faithful, at that point in time. I didn't have a good spiritual connection. So I wasn't going to church. I didn't see these people who genuinely cared about you. And I didn't really think that my actions, had too much of an effect then if I died too soon. Ultimately, I didn't expect to make it to 40 years old. Like, that was just my reality. I had epilepsy. My brain was severely damaged, as a result of a couple different seizures and again, risk factors that come in when you have any amount of cash, any large amount of cash. I got robbed. I got kicked in the face and was, hospitalized. So I'm like, the doctors are telling me my brain might not, last me until 45 kind of thing. And it's like, holy cow, live life fast and hard.
Yeah.
But after being incarcerated, I was 6 times it took. And once I got to the 7th, I finally was like, okay, let's try something new here,
Yeah, sure.
But I got to the 7th time, and it was one of those things for me where I was like, I took classes in jail, which I had never done before. Unfortunately, because of the choices I had made, I wasn't allowed to do work. I wasn't allowed to be a working party inmate or anything like that. I was maximum security. But I took all the classes that I possibly could. Anger management. I got a certificate in sustainable manufacturing.
Wow,
like
good
all
for
these
you.
things that, and ultimately it was just because I knew that I had responsibilities to not just my family, but to myself, to my future. And so I was like, you know what? It's time to try something new.
Yeah.
We've tried the same old for, oh my goodness, for 4.5, almost 5 years, from 19 to, 24 kind of thing. And it just didn't work out. It kept getting me back in jail. And unfortunately, when you're trying to apply for jobs and stuff like that, after being in jail, you have to mark down these little boxes, and then they ask you questions and they go, I'm not sure if you're really a candidate for this job anymore. That's why I say too, it's like I had a newfound respect for people that truly work hard for a living, because there's a lot of people who they're just looking out for their best interest. And so they don't necessarily have enough resources to go, well, we're going to give this guy a chance, because if he does steal from you, if he does rob you, now you're down potentially hundreds of dollars that you don't have to, in excess in your business. You don't want to take that risk. And fortunately, again, I'm talking about people who care. I met a gentleman who had a similar path. And the gentleman I work for now, has also made some of those mistakes in his life. He has committed felonies, which, we both had to check that same box at some point, for job applications. But now he owns restaurants. Now he owns properties, and he's given me a glimmer of hope. And he really mentored me in a lot of different ways and said to me, hey, does not matter what your past is. You know, you can let it haunt you, or you can let it shape and mold, you know, who you will become. And that's up to you. You know, if you want to work, I will give you opportunities to work, you know. And I started off with him like 2 or 3 days a week. And now I'll be lucky if I get a day off in the next 9 months, kind of thing. Like, it's just, there's a lot of responsibility.
Pros and cons, right? It's a blessing to have that amount of work available if you want it.
But, and that's what when like we were talking about leadership, I don't know if that was recorded or not, but like, you know, when we were talking about the leadership side of things and what you can develop your workplace into, it's a relief to go to work. Like I have a routine now with the gentleman who washes dishes. Like, I get 2 Red Bulls and I get a share-a-size Snicker. And I don't even drink Red Bulls like that anymore. But we've gotten started on a routine now. Okay. So I drink at least one a day. But we get a share-a-size Snickers. We split the Snickers and we get a Red Bull apiece, kind of thing, because they're always on sale.
Yep.
And we can talk about, like, he's Hispanic. He barely speaks English, but we can talk about, I speak, you know, pretty fluent Spanish.
Okay.
So we learn, like, I learn Spanish and he learns English, you know, as we talk and work, you know, work in the back, kind of thing. And there's other people there who, because of that environment, it's a relief to go to work. You get to go, you know, I'm going to go talk to Mariah tomorrow about all these terrible things that I've experienced over the last 2 days that we haven't been able to see each other and haven't been able to talk, but we're going to get it all out at work. And it's that environment of, yeah, it is a lot of responsibility, you know, when you have to work, when you're asked to work. I don't have to, but, you know, he asked me to work 7 days a week, but the environment is not taxing. That mental health and that spiritual wellness that I was lacking when I was doing the quick and dirty, you know, work, it's not taxing when I have to go into work, you know, for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time. It doesn't really feel that bad, you know, because I'm almost refreshed. Physically, I might be drained a little bit, right? Because there's a physicality to it that it happens as the day goes on. But I leave there, and I mean, I had a wonderful conversation with my boss and his wife, you know, because their son he adores me. And I mean, he's the best little kid in the world.
That's so great.
He's a wild child, which I can appreciate, you know, because I was one of those.
But he looks up to you.
Well, we were kicking, it's silly, but we were kicking boxes, right? Because he's kicking the crap out of these cardboard boxes that are about to be recycled. And he puts his foot through one of them and just keeps walking like it's, you know, he's got his foot in the side of the box and he keeps walking and he's, you know, making it like some mechanical noises like he's a transformer or something like that. And she looks at me and she was like, you know, he asked me to ask you if you would babysit him after school and stuff like that. And I was like, Tanya, that is insane. I was like, the fact that somebody would even trust me with their child, you know, because they know I have a daughter, but they don't know what kind of person I am. There's plenty of people who are parents that aren't responsible individuals, you know. I probably was not when my daughter was like 3 months old, you know, I was still learning. But it's one of those things for me where, as we were talking earlier, it's reassuring to me mentally. It reaffirms the progress that I have made, because people start to notice things in me before I even internally recognize them.
Yeah.
Because I still have all, you know, the same thoughts. I hear what's going on in my brain, and I know, you know, it's funny, but I still think some of those, you know, those intrusive thoughts a lot of times where it's like, oh my goodness, you know, that, and then, you know, I readjust. I go, that's not a good choice, obviously. You know, don't do those things. That's what got you bad places in life already. You know what those choices get you. Let's try something different from that. But to have somebody externally who doesn't even necessarily know what that means, just a little comment like that where they go, you know, he asked us if you would babysit him, if you'd be interested in doing that a couple times a week. We really would appreciate it, you know. It's 180 degrees from where I was headed in life before.
Yeah.
And like you said, there is pros and cons to it, because it is a large responsibility, but it's so inspiring to me.
Yeah, it's a huge honor to be asked that.
Right. And like, I mean, even him, you know, offering, I'm not going to run the restaurant alone. You know, his wife will be helping me because she's had more years and experience in that. But it's like, for him to go, I want to open a new restaurant. You've been here for 5 months. You're doing really good. I can see that you are eager to learn, which I am.
Yeah.
You know, I want to learn. Like I said, I want to manage my own business someday, and restaurants is probably going to be one of those, you know. So it's one of those things for me. It's like, I am eager to learn and honored that he even has that much trust in me, because sometimes I still don't feel trustworthy myself.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's even being here. It's one of those things for me. It's like, I don't know if kids understand how loved they are sometimes, you know? And so it's to come in here to a place like this and be able to show somebody like, yeah, in the thick of it, you don't necessarily understand how many people are rooting for you.
Yeah.
But we can be supportive of kids in a way in here that they might not, you know, necessarily get outside of here. Hopefully they do, but we can show them that love and that care and compassion.
Exactly.
And it can maybe shine a little light into their, you know, into their life and give them a little something to look forward to.
And when they come here, they'll see it. Like
Right.
they, outside of here, maybe they don't have it at home or in their lives, but when they come here, they will see the mentors like you that are rooting for them and want them to make good choices and have a better life. And just regardless of what stage they're at and what they've been through, there's always good choices that you can make and better paths that you can take, for sure.
There's always potential.
Yes.
And that's the thing too. Like I can't go back and fix the mistakes that I made, right? But I can maybe tell some of these young men and women like, hey, there's going to be pitfalls. Things are going to seem tempting. There's a lot of different choices and paths that you can take in life. But ultimately, you know, my grandfather used to tell me all the time, you know what you're doing. You know when you're doing wrong because you get that feeling in your stomach. And he's like, if you get that feeling, just reassess. Not every choice is going to be black and white, but make the choice that you feel most comfortable with, knowing that you're doing the right thing.
Right. You stop and kind of take that inventory.
Yeah.
Like, what am I doing? Is this good? Am I feeling this feeling because of something I should be reassessing the situation or making a slightly different decision?
And sometimes it's anxiety, you know, sometimes it's just
absolutely.
like, wow, this is going to have a large impact. Those choices are tough to make. And sometimes you get that feeling, but a lot of times too, that gives you a moment to stop and process, you know, and not every choice you're going to think through to the, you know, umpteenth degree and say, oh my goodness, 15 years down the road, you know, if I make the wrong choice here, you know, it's going to have a terrible impact on my life. But for the most part, you know, I've become very moralist in my views, and it's just you do the next right thing. I think one of the reasons why I can appreciate, you know, how hard people work for a living is because I see what others do, and I'm more willing now to put myself in their shoes and go, all right, he may have flipped me off and said some unkind words to me, right? But he's probably having a really rough day.
Yeah.
You know, it looks like he's still dressed in his work clothes, you know, and it's 9:00 at night. So he either got off at 5 or he was asked to work extra hours or like whatever the case may be. And it's like just understanding that people need love, people need compassion, people need kindness, you know, and I was not one of those people that was willing to show that for a long time. You know, I wanted to put on this tough exterior, my father being in the military, very rough outer shell kind of thing. Now I know he's a big teddy bear, but like the child that I was, you know, as I perceived him as a young man, he was very stern and very strict and very structured. And there's good reason for that, but I didn't understand why he was that way. And so that's what I tried to emulate, and it was not with a deep understanding of what the structure is for, why he is the way he is. And that's to maintain, you know, for him to maintain the structure in his life. For me, it's one of those things where now I'm learning, in order to maintain my well-being, my spiritual well-being, my happiness, it's just being kind to other people.
Yeah.
I don't know what impact I can have on these kids' lives, but the potential that they do have, you know, it's that old butterfly effect, you know. It's like
exactly.
We might be able to say something to them here that stops them from going out. You know, there's a young lady who, you know, may have gotten in some trouble with some physical conflicts, right? And she's very upset coming in here, and you can say to her, listen, just understand that you've already gotten in trouble for this before. Anything past this point, you're going to be repeating, you know, as an offense in the eyes of the law. So legally, there may be higher repercussions.
Yeah.
You know, if you go out and make, you know, a spur of the moment choice and get into another physical conflict, they're not going to look at it. You know, you're not a first time offender anymore. They're going to say, well, this is a habit. They're going to punish you more strictly. There's going to be, you know, increasing consequences and higher degrees of, you know, repercussions if you make this choice. Just sit here and talk to us about it, you know, and I've never been in a position to do that before. Hopefully I will be receptive as a father if my daughter ever has that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But these kids in here, it's like, especially after having a daughter, I'm just like, it worries me so much, because I'm like, you see what these kids are going through, and I just want to help. Like, I don't know how I can help. Some days it's just cooking for them.
Yeah.
I love to cook. I love to feed people. That's
amazing.
why I got into the restaurants.
We all need to eat, and that is such a common ground.
Well, and I love it too, because it's just like, even if I made, like the other day, the first time I made lasagnas, I think we made 7 of them.
Okay.
Or like, it was, 5 or 7. I can't remember how many pans we made. But it was
good.
a lot for the first time. I've never made homemade lasagna. I used to go buy Stouffer's lasagnas.
Okay.
And thankfully, Olivia helped me. Shout out to Liv. But I would not have been able to do it. But I was like, I thought it was not good. I thought the cheese ratio was wrong. Because again, I'm my own harshest critic. And being a cook, being a chef, I was like, no, the cheese ratio is off here. I should have used less Asiago cheese mix and just use the Parmesan and the... And bottom line is, they freaking ate it up, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, it's delicious!" And I was like, "You guys make me feel good about myself sometimes." It's a give and take here, because I'm like, I felt terrible about the lasagna, and then they ate it and they were like, "Man, that was really good," I'm like, okay, hey, you know what? You ate it. Like you said, we all need to eat. So especially those boxers out there working their bums off.
Exactly.
They're like, when it's time to eat, it's time to eat. I don't care what's on the plate, just no vegetables.
It's so subjective. Like, something that you might not think is good, they might think is good, and vice versa. Food is so much of preferences too, and I know that as a cook. It's like, there's things that you absolutely love, and then dishes that other people just don't like, and you never know. But I think your mantra of, I don't know exactly what I might be able to do or might be able to influence, but I just focus on being kind to people. I think that is so impactful, and just the presence of those who volunteer here, just being here, means so much for kids to see them coming back, and they know that they are giving up other things to be here, and they're spending time, and the kids know that you work full time and you're here after work and you're probably tired, and you still show up. That consistency, just your presence, I think, has a difference, and ultimately it's the little things, really. It's the actions that you do, whether it's cooking for someone or just talking to someone or just being here and being willing to help with whatever Will needs, like you said. It's a good example for them to see, even if it feels small. I think there's so much value in that. Well, to wrap up, I thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Guys.
I have one last question that I want to ask. You mentioned with you being in the system as a juvenile, there was a lack of resources. What kinds of things I don't know, you've probably thought about this a lot, but what kinds of things do you think should change so there's more resources at that time in your life? What did you need at that time in your life that wasn't there?
I needed an education.
Okay. Formal or informal, or what kind of education?
So that's one of the reasons why I really got back into Benchmark as well. So Will didn't really pitch, but just kind of gave me an idea of what the drug and alcohol program here is that they're going to be able to offer. And it will still fulfill. So I was on juvenile probation. It will be able to still fulfill the probationary requirements of a drug and alcohol class. So I got sat down. We worked through a booklet, right? And you fill in little blanks in a page that it's a lot like homework.
Yeah.
The formal education is necessary to, again, kind of understand what those substances might do. I don't want to say pros and cons because they're mostly cons, but the negative effects of those things. However, nobody really sat down in a space that you're comfortable with, because a lot of times, I was living in Mono's house in a group home. And so you have to go to class, once or twice a week, and you have to sit, either before or afterwards with a counselor or a therapist, and they don't really tell you firsthand experience. They have a lot of knowledge, and book smarts and that kind of stuff, which, again, very useful to know. However, one of the reasons, or one of the things that Will had talked about when we were sitting down at lunch when we had reconnected, was they're looking at starting a drug and alcohol program, because a lot of the kids that come here, they get to know the mentors.
Yeah.
And they will be able to, connect with these kids in a different way. Yes, you're going to have to fill out some of those homework assignments, some of those books still,
right.
But you're going to be able to sit down next to them on a weight bench or on a couch, or, at the table eating food, or even back in the homework room. There's places, there's connections that are built in a different environment, in a different setting, versus just a very institutional kind of setting where you're sitting down having to take, I did it at the county offices down there at Binns Park.
Okay.
I remember those classes. Like it was torture. I mean,
it's cold, boring, unwelcoming. You don't feel like opening up. In a space like this, you probably can feel a little bit more comfortable, and they're more receptive to people that they might know.
And a lot of us have lived experience, and we can share about that and say, listen, I know, it was enticing. I'm sure you wanted to hang out with these people and do what they did, and for whatever reasons, it didn't work out. It got you in trouble. The game's not over yet. The fat lady hasn't sung. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's failing forward and readjusting at those moments. I think particularly as well, the ability to give the resources necessary and say, I've lived that life. And maybe even if they haven't had, necessarily an experience like mine, let's say I failed a lot, because of drugs and alcohol, and made a lot of poor choices that took some opportunities off the table for me. But even just recognizing that and saying, hey, the path that you're headed down is a very potentially treacherous road. You might lose out on some opportunities, some very, valuable opportunities, where it's like, I interviewed for jobs already, and I got two interviews in, and you'd fill out the onboarding paperwork, and they go, unfortunately, it's company policy, and we cannot hire you, And I was looking at, working with people who had 16, 17 years of experience in this industry, and I'm excited, and man, you get that rejection. And you can avoid all that. You can tell these kids, hey, you can avoid all of that just by reassessing and adjust now, And I think that, I don't know that you can always give testimonials to people. You can't always say, hey, I see what road you're going down. Sometimes kids aren't ready to listen. People aren't ready to listen. We're independent. We've been, endowed with free will. So that's one of those things where it's like, I don't know that everybody is always ready to hear that. But that's why I say too, it's like, I don't know how that would look, especially in the juvenile system. I think it's got to be a very delicate approach sometimes, because kids have gone through different stuff. They have different traumas. They have different experiences in the home life that may have led to this. They might have had alcoholic or drug addicted parents. I didn't have either of those things, but I can still speak to the negative effects of that. So I think in this, especially in a setting like this with Benchmark, it gives a platform as well as an education. And then, you can build from there and hopefully get them, like we have, amazing programs to get these kids into leadership and stuff like that, and get them into service. Because ultimately all it is putting your energies and efforts into something positive.
Yes, exactly.
And if you can get them and show them the positive benefits and allow them to, like, that begins to manifest in their lives. They feel good about themselves. They go, oh my goodness, like, I love coming in. And, I think Liv genuinely likes cooking for people. Like, she just loves making food for people. She was so happy to help out in the kitchen. And I was like, to see somebody, that age that is just genuinely interested in helping out, and they begin to reap positive effects of, just good morals, being a good person, being a productive member of society, like you were saying. It's like,
absolutely.
I think if we can show kids that, that is a very rewarding thing in and of itself. Yes. I think I've been more blessed in the last, year and a half, 2 years of my life kind of thing, that it's like, as I started to change and just do good things. I'm no saint, I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but building, meaningful relationships. Like the gentleman, Andrew out front, he and I talk about, everything in life now. Cause we've got some similar, stories going on. He's got a daughter, and we're talking about the the fatherhood, aspect of things.
Yeah.
But like, I never have had relationships like that. I've never had people like that genuinely care about my well-being, and I genuinely care about theirs in return, because you just want to be good, productive people,
Yeah.
and ultimately it comes down to people.
Right.
If you are kind to people, I think for the most part, you get that back. And to show people how good and not for your own selfish, intentions, but just even when somebody isn't nice to you, when you have shown them kindness, you can rest easy and know in your heart of hearts that it's like, even if they were, mean to me today or something like that, I still did the right thing.
Absolutely.
And that's like the best, thing you can have is peace. And just know that it's like, I lived a very, peaceless life for a long period of time. And to have that peace is the most rewarding thing. And so I don't know how we achieve all the resources necessary in the juvenile system to teach kids that per se.
Yeah.
But we can definitely work at it bit by bit,
absolutely.
and give them a platform, give them a great way to spend their time, energy, and efforts, here at Benchmark.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Noah.
Thank you,
I appreciate it. I appreciate you sharing your story. Thank you for your time and listening. And stay tuned for the next story of those who are impacting our community. Bye.